Okay. I've left this far too long. Let's end this. So, this is a bit unconventional, but I think I want to start off this video by explaining why such a long gap between the second and final part. Well, the reason why is because I recorded all the voiceover for all 3 planned parts in one session for that video. And then, I threw the entirety of part 3 out. To be completely honest, it kind of felt like I was just going through a laundry list, and the actual stuff I had to say was not that entertaining. I mean, I wanted to do a series that felt very complete on the game, and so I liked the idea of covering everything, but naturally, having already covered the story mode and the main content of the game in the first part, and covered the final boss Hyperion in the second part, well, like, all there really is left to do is talk about, like, post-game content and the last 2 unlockables I haven't mentioned in the game, but that's just the thing. Doodle Hex is not a game that is truly meant to be completed. I'll admit it. I hate to say it too, because since I love this game so much, I really want to end on a high note, but there just isn't really a way I can make it happen, because God is the post-game where all the problems with this game rear its ugly head. There's a reason why I replay the main story so often in Doodle Hex, and that's because outside of the main story, the game's content, if I'm completely honest, does kind of suck. The only other offerings is a multiplayer that I have never been able to play, unfortunately, because of the fact that the DS emulator cannot emulate multiplayer, and when I had the physical game on my actual DS, I couldn't find anyone else on the planet who had this game, so I'd never get to play it with anyone. Anyway, aside from the multiplayer, all you get is quick duels, which is basically custom games, where you just get to set up a one-on-one match with your own custom rules, and challenge mode, which is, well, a bunch of specialized challenges for you to complete under time limits in certain situations. The only thing that's really worthwhile checking out other than the main story is that there are custom runes, as I like to call them, that you can unlock by completing some of the challenges, though some of them just give you codes to enter at the Doodle Hex website, which no longer exists, which apparently back when it did exist would just give you nothing but shitty wallpapers. Anyway, these custom runes are pretty cool in the fact they are brand new runes that add brand new functionality to the game, but the reason why I don't lose my mind over them is because, well, unfortunately, first of all, these things are unbalanced as fuck. And listen, I understand that I'm talking about a effectively single-player game here, but Christ, I mean they are ludicrously imbalanced even for a single-player game. And I don't just mean they're all overpowered, some of them are, but weirdly enough, some of them are also ludicrously underpowered, which means a good half of the runes or so that you unlock in these challenges are basically useless, because you can only use them in customs, and on top of that, even in customs, there are other runes that are so stupidly broken that the underpowered options just feel unusable. I mean, I'm not kidding. If you want, you can be invincible forever with Professor Carbuncle by just spamming the same 2 runes over and over. You are literally impossible to kill if you do this. That's the level of stupidly unbalanced we're talking about when it comes down to custom runes. Don't get me wrong, they're still fun to play around with for a bit, but even then, a lot of them are clones of each other. There's not that many, although there are a couple brand new, unique custom runes. You'll notice as you go looking through all these characters, although this looks like a lot of these are duplicates of each other, or runes that technically have slightly different effects, but clearly they're kind of copy-pasting already existing runes. It's the kind of thing that's cool to play 1 or 2 times, because it's like, whoa, these games are crazy, but then because they're so ludicrously poorly balanced, they do get pretty boring pretty fast. I don't know, the only thing that actually does feel pretty fun consistently, in my opinion, is that one of the curses you'll see a lot of in custom games is the bouncy bomb curse. And in fairness, the bouncy bomb is some casual, just stupid fun that is pretty funny. Essentially, it's a curse that bounces back the opposite direction whenever it gets blocked, but once it gets big enough, it becomes perfect automatically, so you start having to use the super shield to block it. And so you get wrapped up into this deadly game of tennis on steroids with the enemy player. And so if you just have a game where you just spam this bouncy bomb all over the screen, yeah, shenanigans can happen that are pretty funny and cool. For the most part, though, that is literally the entirety of the game's post-game content. And the challenges themselves, Christ, man. These things range from ludicrously, psychotically difficult to brain-dead easy. There is no middle ground. Some of these challenges, you just have to spam runes at the opponent, not have to strategize at all, and you'll just win for free. And some of them are so ludicrously precise and difficult that you quite literally have to engage in AI manipulation to make the challenge even physically possible. I feel like it's so hard to get this across if you haven't experienced it yourself, but like genuinely, some of these challenges don't feel like actual challenges. Some of them feel like ludicrously cryptic puzzles where genuinely it feels like you're supposed to do this using a TAS. Especially when you get to challenges where you have to use the opponent's own runes against them, but the runes that they use seem to be random. However, it's only pseudo-random because it's also partially based off of the actions you do. I'm not kidding, some of these challenges are so ludicrously cryptic and impossible that I eventually figured out that some of these ones I could not beat for the life of me. You quite literally have to shield thin air to confuse the AI opponent to casting runes they wouldn't usually cast, which then breaks up the timing of all their combos and then makes the challenge possible. Whereas, as I discovered literally with the use of save states to confirm, going frame by frame, some of these challenges literally would be physically impossible even if you played like a perfect TAS robot, if you didn't engage in this level of stupidly cryptic AI manipulation. Probably the single most obvious example of this, although quite basic example of it in fairness, is this challenge in Nadia's selection of challenges. And this one will live in my head rent-free forever. Because this is the first challenge where I realized that I had to engage in dumb AI manipulation to actually make some of these challenges possible. Because I remembered that as a kid, I was really bad at these challenges, and there weren't that many that I could complete. And even the ones I could complete, I'd always forget which ones the easy ones were because there's so many of them and they're hard to remember. But there was one challenge I remember doing on like my second try or something. It was not that hard for me as a kid, and I was really glad I could get it done. And so I always memorized this is the easy one. And this would be a challenge in which Nadia is assaulted with non-stop, huge, extremely fast, perfect green and red runes. And you would have to use the blessing that you would unlock by completing this challenge, which gives you the glass shield Hyperion gets that allows you to reflect any other runes that you block. You would have to use this in combination with the super shield to reflect these giant runes back at the opponent to kill them. You would have no other runes in your Grimoire, so the only way you could physically possibly ever kill them is by reflecting enough runes back at them to kill them with their own runes. Now, this seems really simple at first, right? Maybe a difficult timing, but all you do is you cast the Glass Shield Blessing, and you activate the Super Shield, and you block. That's how you do it, right? I mean, maybe it's a difficult timing, but that's all you gotta do. Well, that's how I remembered it. I only remembered doing that and it working and getting it on my second try. When I came back to do this to get 100% and finally complete this game for good, I could not beat this challenge for the life of me. I am embarrassed to admit that while I did watch videos in the background, I may have spent literally like an hour and a half trying to figure out how the fuck this challenge was this ludicrously difficult. And one thing I just couldn't shake the whole time was I had this feeling like I wasn't even close, but I must have been doing this nearly frame perfect at this point. And I don't know, there was nothing else to do except shield and use the blessing. So like, it felt like there couldn't possibly be anything else more to this. But like, there must be, because even when I blocked as late as physically possible, I was pretty sure I was quite literally landing frame-perfect blocks, and still, I was clearly not even close to completing this challenge. Eventually, I was losing my mind, I had to know for sure. I slowed down the game so much that it was running one frame at a time, and I used save states to figure out the exact latest frame you could possibly shield without dying. And I literally performed a frame perfect block, this time literally playing it in giga slow motion to make sure I absolutely did get the frame perfect. And I still was not even close. It was quite literally impossible. But that can't be right. How did I do it so easily as a kid? Do you want to know how? I didn't remember doing this, but apparently I did. If you hold shield at the start of the challenge, the AI for some reason casts the runes closer together, which makes it possible. It never does this if you don't shield at the start. And again, you're shielding thin air, so why would you shield at the start? But if you don't do it, it's literally impossible. And again, this is one of the more basic examples of literally having to perform AI manipulation just to make these challenges possible. I'll put it this way, if you're like me and you're obsessed with getting everything you can out of this game, sure, maybe give the challenges a go. But if you're just looking to check in on this game, give it a little go, see if you like it, for the love of God, steer clear of this menu. This is for masochists only. And also, if you are going to give this menu a go, I highly recommend, especially if you're not just planning to do 1 or 2 challenges and call it a day, I highly recommend that you do play on emulator. You are going to lose your mind if you're not able to play with save states. And honestly, if these challenges drive you at the wall enough, I would not blame you for playing them in slow motion to beat them easier. Personally, I wanted the glory, so I subjected myself to playing all of these honestly, only using save states to retry faster. But that's only because I wanted to say I got 100% in this game fair and square. If you aren't that masochistic, then I highly recommend just don't touch these things. Okay, that's enough about challenges. I know that's not what you're here for, really. I remember the cliffhanger I left you on at the end of part 2. Here we go. The last character. So, forgive me. I'm going to tell a little bit of a story to get into this. Just because it's really important you hear this before I reveal who the last character is. I want you to understand just how much that last question mark drove me mad. I really thought that once I beat the game, I would unlock the final character. And I thought the final character was probably going to be Hyperion. But I beat Hyperion, and I did not unlock that final character. And I did it on hard too. So it wasn't that I wasn't on the right difficulty. At least, so it seemed. I went to beat Hyperion on more characters, and I managed to cross a couple more off the list, but I mean, some of these characters are a lot harder than others to beat Hyperion with. And so once I got about a third of the way through the roster, I really hit a rut, and I just couldn't get any more done. And during that rut, I was thinking to myself, I mean, like, am I really gonna have to beat the entire game with all of these characters? Especially considering for the teachers, I just had to beat the final version of them with one character. It just felt like if I was going to unlock this final character by doing something in story mode, I should already have unlocked him if I've literally beaten the game on hard already. And considering at this point I had barely touched the challenges menu, I was dreading the thought that maybe, just maybe, the way I unlocked this character was rather to beat all the challenges in the game. Something that would have been a lot harder for me. It eventually got to the point where I genuinely spent so long just grinding my way to try and unlock this character and not being able to do it, that I just kind of came to accept I probably would never know what was behind that question mark. But just as I came to accept it, I did have a thought. What if that last question mark is not Hyperion? And you might be thinking, okay then, who is it then? Well, here's the thing. You might think it sounds crazy to assume this character would be anything but Hyperion, considering it's very clear that this game has already kind of shown all the characters it's going to show. It's not going to introduce a brand new character at the last minute as like a secret extra, unless maybe it's like a joke character. If there's going to be one last character in this game, it's going to be one we've already seen, but one that we've never been able to play before. And I mean, isn't Hyperion the only character that fits that description? No. There is one other character who we've been able to see, even been able to play against, but we have never been able to play ourselves. And that character is Kalamazoo, the very person who faces us on the opposite side of that screen in the practice range, or helps demonstrate our combos when we watch demos, or, notably, the very person who acts as our opponent in every single challenge in the entire game. And Kalamazoo as a final character would make sense. He's a bit of a wild card. Kalamazoo can do anything, be anyone. And so that does kind of make for a cool idea for a final character for truly beating the game. Not to mention, while in custom games you can set up a fight that's between two people playing the same character, at which point one of them will become a palette swap, in the story mode, you will never, ever, even once come across a situation where one player is fighting a copy of themselves. If you pick any of the 10 normal characters, as I mentioned, you fight 9 students. So you simply fight the 9 other characters you didn't pick. And if you pick a teacher, you refight one of the other teachers a second time instead of fighting yourself. If this final character was Hyperion, who would the final boss be? That can't be right. Hyperion can't fight Hyperion. But you know who could fight Hyperion, and who quite literally fights Hyperion in the lore? Kalamazoo. More and more, I became convinced this last character slot was Kalamazoo, and it was done by beating challenges. And because these challenges were so impossibly difficult, I really thought I would never get to see it. But years pass, and I love this game, so even if I've given up hope for unlocking this character, I'm still playing it. And so slowly, I'm crossing more and more off the list, until we get down to the final 3. The last 3 that were really huge thorns in my side. Gizmo, Cassie, and Princess Tiffany. These characters in particular are terribly equipped to fight Hyperion, and so they are some of the most difficult characters to beat the game with. Years pass, but eventually I beat the game with Gizmo. Eventually, I beat the game with Princess Tiffany. And eventually, I beat the game with Cassie. Now, at this point, I was so used to playing on hard all the time, for some of these I beat them on normal. So because of that, I didn't see a star on every character. The stars that I had were split across normal and hard. And so I actually genuinely did not realize that when I beat Hyperion with Cassie, I'd actually beaten the game with everyone. This might sound dumb, but I need you to understand, this was years. It had been so long that it took me to beat this game with everyone that I genuinely did not remember when I beat the game with Cassie, that Cassie was the last character left. I forgot that I'd already beaten it with Princess Tiffany. I thought I hadn't. And once I had beaten Hyperion with Cassie, I was proven wrong. I saw it. The last slot on the character select field. And yes, it was Hyperion. Okay, so why did I go on this big roundabout to say, oh, was it going to be Kalamazoo? Is it going to be Kalamazoo? Oh no, it was Hyperion. Because, oh boy. Listen, I don't like doing this. I really don't. But I gotta be honest with you. Seeing Hyperion there was kind of a huge disappointment. First of all, because Kalamazoo would have been cooler, to be honest. And I was really getting invested in the idea that Kalamazoo would have been such a cool playable character, and he would have made so much more sense, and it would have been a cooler reward if it tied into the challenges menu and etc. But whatever. I've gotten this final character, and hey, I can't complain, right? I mean, I dedicated a whole part to talking about how Hyperion is quite possibly my favorite final boss in any game ever. And I mean, being given the opportunity to play as the fucking final boss, how can I complain about that? Well, maybe I could complain about it if the game didn't really let you play as the final boss. If the game kinda cheated you. What if I told you Hyperion isn't good? What if I told you Hyperion isn't even average? What if I told you Hyperion isn't even just bad? What if I told you that Hyperion is the single least functional character in this entire game, and genuinely, I have come to the conclusion is probably the weakest character in the entire roster out of all 14 characters. Could you believe me? The fact that Hyperion is such a terrible character, unfortunately, really is a betrayal to the player. Especially because it's embarrassing that the teachers, which once you've actually played against Hyperion, feel like nothing in comparison to him, genuinely felt like far more badass rewards. The teachers, for the most part, are just as strong as they were when you fought them when you get to play them. The only exception being that one speed boost blessing that only the AI Carbuncle gets to use, and you as a player are only allowed to use in customs. Other than that one rune, which isn't even that big of a deal, when it comes to the teachers, what you see is what you get. When you get to play Lepang, you get to use his Dragon Egg curse. You get to use his curse that wipes the whole screen. You don't even see that on AI Lepang. When you play Madrugada, you get to spam those giant red runes and lifesteal off of them. When you play Carbuncle, you get to use his Portal curse. Now when you think of Hyperion, what's the #1 rune that pops to mind? Perilous Portal, right? I mean, you probably didn't know it's called that, but that's the name of the blessing that reverses the direction of all runes on the screen. I mean, that is the single most broken ability that Hyperion has access to. And sure, maybe you could argue it would be broken in the hands of the player, too broken. But remember, this reward is only unlocked for for beating the game with every fucking character. You've already basically completed the game at this point. Why not let the player have a bit of a power trip, you know? Why not let them mess around with Hyperion and tear the story mode apart with Perilous Portal? But no, Perilous Portal is only allowed in customs. Okay, fair enough. At least we get to use the glass shield, right? I actually kind of suspected they might disable Perilous Portal in story mode because it's just that broken. But the glass shield, don't get me wrong, is very strong, but it's not broken. It allows you to block red runes fully, and it allows you to reflect runes that you block, but unless you combo it with a super shield, it doesn't make your shield invincible. It's only really a way of putting some aggro on the opponent while blocking. It's also a very expensive blessing. So it would be perfectly balanced to use in story mode, especially on such a powerful character, right? Well, that's also customs only. Okay. Well, at least you can still use the auto shield blessing that he has, right? Nope. It's even worse than you probably would have thought. It's not even that the auto shield blessing is a customs only rune. This is actually the only rune in the entire game, which is not only AI only, but you can't even unlock it in customs. Why? Genuinely no idea. My best guess, and this is a guess, but as you know, I have been hacking this game a lot and looking for unused runes. And one thing that was really interesting is usually when I try and hack in an unused rune that no longer has a texture, the game just crashes. However, something interesting happened when I tried to load in the silver auto shield blessing. Gizmo's auto shield blessing is the bronze auto shield blessing, and Rainbow's is the gold one. The silver one, as far as I was aware, was completely unused but programmed, and I wanted to force load it in to see if it had a texture. And again, if it didn't have a texture, I was expecting it would crash the game, and if it did, it should work as usual. It would simply be another auto shield blessing, but with a different shape and a cost that is in between the cost of both Rainbow and Gizmo's, while not lasting quite as long as Rainbow's, but longer than Gizmo's. However, when I tried to load this blessing into the game, neither one of these things happened. Instead, I was caught off guard to see that it seemed to have loaded the gold auto shield blessing, even though I told it to load the silver one. However, when I actually played with it, I noticed it was cheaper than it should be. As far as I can tell, I think what's going on here is that they plan to give Hyperion a silver auto shield blessing, but they never made a texture for it. So they just made the silver auto shield blessing share the gold auto shield blessing texture, and then because it's not supposed to do that, they just made it so the player can never use it and it's only ever given to AI Hyperion. That's my best guess. But all of this is basically just speculation based on what I've seen by hacking in some unused runes.
My calculations were correct.
The bottom line here is that Hyperion's set of runes for the most part sucks. He does get to keep the curse that gets bigger for every red rune on the screen, and that is the only unique curse he has in his entire roster of runes. But from there, he steals Lepang's Mana Stealing curse, even though that's supposed to be exclusive to Lepang. He gets a Perfect Blessing, he gets the medium red rune, he gets Caleb's screen cover curse, he gets the mini curse for some reason, he gets Phase Barrier Blessing, and he gets the giant green rune. That's his entire Grimoire. Everything about this character that was impressive is completely stripped away from him by the time you're allowed to play him. Now, while the fact that you can't use any of Hyperion's actually impressive or iconic runes is definitely the one that stings the most at first, I think what stings more in the long run is that he's not even just like a bad but functional character. He is fundamentally a dysfunctional character which barely even fulfills its role. And don't tell me, oh, well, at least you can use Perilous Portal and the Glass Shield in customs. Everyone can use that shit in customs. Okay, maybe not Perilous Portal specifically, but what does that really matter when customs is so ludicrously poorly balanced that Professor Carbuncle is the most broken character in the game and literally unbeatable because he has a way to get infinite invincibility frames? So why is it that Hyperion fundamentally does not function as a proper Doodle Hex character? What is he missing that everyone else has? Well, take a look at his Grimoire. What stands out to you as, maybe lacking here? Maybe some things that are overrepresented? Right off the bat, you might notice that weirdly, even though he uses very few curses in his actual boss fight, he has a little too many curses in his actual Grimoire. And we've already gone over how curses typically are some of the weakest spells in the game. That's definitely not good, but I mean, there's other good stuff here, right? There's the giant green rune. Well, the giant green rune's only good if you can combo it with a speed boost, or at least an enlargement blessing. Hyperion doesn't have either of those things. He only has the perfect blessing. And it's not super mana efficient to just spam perfect giant green runes. What's really missing here? That's right, blessings. I said it at the start and I'll say it again. Blessings are the single most important form of rune in Doodle Hex. Inarguably. Way more important than curses, way more important than green or red runes. It's blessings. And Hyperion quite literally only has 2 in his entire kit. The least that any character in the entire game has. Now, that could be fine if the 2 blessings he had were exactly the 2 things he needed. Now, you might find this a bit of a strange thing to say at first. You look at these runes and they might not seem too bad. I mean, the perfect blessing I genuinely think is one of the most broken blessings in the game, and the stronger version of the barrier blessing that Faye gets, Hyperion also gets, and I think this is one of the most powerful defensive blessings in the entire game as well. Combine this with his unique curse for some really powerful offensive value, and damn, I mean, what's wrong here? It seems like while maybe Hyperion doesn't have that many blessings, his blessings are extremely strong. Well, they are extremely strong in a vacuum. The problem is that the character is missing things it needs to even work in the first place. If you haven't noticed it yet, there's something a bit more specific than just blessings that Hyperion doesn't have that all 13 other members of the cast have. I'll give you one last chance to guess if you haven't already got it before I say it. It is mana generation. Every single character in the entire roster either gets a blessing which generates mana for blocking runes, a blessing which generates mana for dealing damage, a blessing which increases their mana regeneration speed, or a blessing which gives mana discounts on their spells. Hyperion is the only character in all of Doodle Hex to have not a single blessing that allows them to generate more mana in their entire kit. You could say, but they do have one way to generate mana. They have the same curse that Lapang has, which steals all the opponent's mana to refill yours. And you wouldn't be incorrect to say this. However, try using this as your main source of mana generation for longer than 2 minutes and you'll already see the issues. While this curse is very cheap to cast and does give a full mana refill if it lands, there are so many problems with it. First of all, just the fact it's a curse in general, which makes it extremely counterable. And if it gets countered, well, there goes your only form of mana generation. Second of all, this only generates mana if you're missing mana. In other words, you're incentivized to dump all your mana and leave yourself with no mana left, making yourself extremely vulnerable before this curse hits to get the maximum amount of mana gain from it. And the problem with that is, what if you spend all of your mana ready to do a big combo when your mana refills, and then the opponent just super shields your curse and you don't get a mana refill, and now you're stuck holding shield with like 1/10 of your mana bar full, and by the time you've dropped shield, the opponent's had like 10 seconds to make whatever combos he wants and you're still stuck at half mana. Think you can just overcome not having mana by just hitting super hard because you're Hyperion? Well, first of all, you don't get giant runes like the AI Hyperion gets. No, your runes are even smaller than the Djinns. So you're not really hitting like a truck unless you're hitting with big curses or you're hitting with big green runes. But again, remember, you have no speed boost blessing and no enlargement blessing, so you're not hitting with those. You don't even have a mana generation blessing, so you can't even do super stack combos without any speed boost or enlargement. You just have to do basic bread and butter combos with absolutely no flair or style, meaning every single character in the entire game not only has better mana regeneration than you, but also better combo game. And while Hyperion does have strengths, he doesn't have real strengths. He has fake strengths. Yes, the perfect blessing is busted, and usually instantly practically by default makes whatever character owns it at the very least a mid tier, if not usually borderline broken. Just one issue. The only problem the perfect blessing has ever had is how overpriced it is, costing 50% of your mana, and that's before you factor in the extra cost of the second rune you're going to cast. Meanwhile, if I remember correctly, this is just off the top of my head, so take it with a pinch of salt, but I'm pretty sure the barrier blessing costs 70% of your mana. The red rune curse isn't cheap either, and is only valuable when comboed with the perfect rune blessing. Literally the only thing that Hyperion has going for himself is that he does hit pretty hard when he gets a chance to hit. That's the problem though. He gets very few chances to get in, and almost everything he wants to do gets absolutely decimated by the super shield. In fact, quite literally, your main attraction here, the curse that gets bigger for every red rune on the screen, is just begging to be a magnet for a super shield to negate all the value you are going to get for your huge play. And on most characters, this wouldn't be the end of the world. You can't do anything about the super shield with most characters, so you accept that you're going to get super shielded, but you just don't overcommit. You do an attack that's big enough to need the super shield, but not so big that you're going to lose all your resources. And then once the super shield's gone, you do a quick follow-up combo and hit them with it before they can get a super shield back. The problem is that Hyperion already needs to spend his entire mana reserve multiple times over just to make a decent combo that'll hit pretty hard, and then once he's done that, he has no method to regenerate his mana really. As a result, well, shit. There you go. Inevitably, you only get the one attack, and while that's probably a huge attack that could have been great if it landed, they're always just gonna super shield it. And sure, you can try and follow up, but you're not gonna be able to follow up with much when it takes so long to regenerate all your mana that you won't even be able to do anything once you have it all back. Not to mention, that whole time that you're sitting there waiting to regenerate your mana, you're just sitting there, letting the opponent set up his own combos, which you're then going to have to be stuck in block, having to deal with. This is awful for Hyperion. Since the last video, I've played this game even more, and in fact, I feel like I've reached enlightenment. I don't know, as far as playing this game single player goes, I feel like I've reached the peak of the amount of skill I could learn for the most part. Probably could go a little bit further, but I feel like I've reached a soft cap. At the end of the day, especially when I play on my phone instead, now that I figured out you can get DS emulators on phone, I actually did not know that until a couple years ago. But now that I do, playing with touch controls on a phone screen, oh my god, I can draw so fast on there that I can basically beat Hyperion 2 out of 3 times whenever I play CASSIE, despite how garbage CASSIE's matchup into Hyperion is. I feel like I've kind of done it all at this point. I've beaten the game so many times over with every single character in the game, and so I feel like I'm more experienced now. Not that I wasn't experienced when I made the first 2 videos, I still had plenty under my belt, but by this point I feel like I really have the full picture. And one thing I always thought was kind of true, but just became more true the more I learned this game, is that you want to play very aggressive in this game. The number one way that you will lose in this game is if you decide to play too defensive. Is if you decide that you're going to stop what you're doing constantly to shield what the enemy is throwing at you. Because in the time you're sitting, holding your shield, not doing anything back to the enemy is always just going to cast another combo, which you're then going to have to keep blocking to deal with. And eventually, it gets to the point at which you're not even attacking the enemy anymore, you're just holding block and hoping you don't die. Even to the point where there are some situations where if I think that what I'm going to get is going to be devastating and uncounterable enough, I genuinely think it's sometimes worthwhile to just not even try blocking incoming combos and just let them hit your face if it means you can keep up the aggro so hard that the opponent's going to be locked in their block for a really long time. So why am I bringing this up? Because this further helps illustrate why Hyperion is the worst character in the game. Hyperion literally does not have the mana available to him to keep the aggro upon the opponent. And so, when you play Hyperion, no matter how well you play him, you're always going to let the opponent cast more combos at you because you simply don't have the mana to keep casting combos at them and force them to shield instead. So you're forced to shield a lot of the game. I've already mentioned the few offensive capabilities you have just bait you into losing tons of resources to a super shield. Both the Perfect Blessing being a massive mana sink, and on top of that, the Red Curse, of course, being really bad against super shield. I've already mentioned that you can't get past Super Shield because you just don't get mana fast enough. Hell, I say that it takes ages to refill. It's not even just that it takes ages to refill, it's also that a refill isn't even enough, because you go for a refill, but then you need to refresh your Barrier Blessing to not die to the incoming damage while you're waiting to refill, but then also on top of that, you need to wait to get your Perfect Blessing ready, and then you need to wait to get 100% mana after casting the Perfect Blessing before you can start your combo again, which really means you're not waiting to regenerate 100% of your mana, you're waiting to regenerate 220% of your mana before you're even able to act again. That is a lot of just sitting there and waiting, letting the opponent do whatever they want to you. And the best part is, despite having the highest defense stat in the entire game, Hyperion doesn't even have that good defensive capabilities. Like, his pure shield stats are very good, obviously his shield regeneration is very fast, having 5-star defense, but the only defensive ability he has other than that is his barrier, which yes is strong, but notably can only absorb direct damage, like from red runes or green runes. It cannot negate curses, which laughably makes Hyperion, again, this is the fucking final boss as a playable character. Hyperion is quite possibly the only character in this game that's actually fucking scared of curses, the worst runes in the game. Because how do you actually stop curses from hitting you as Hyperion? You have to super shield them. If you just hold shield, you're not going to block them if they combo correctly. You don't have a blessing to make your shield regenerate faster, you don't have a blessing to cancel out the effects of curses, you don't have any ways to make the enemy's attacks more manageable to you, you just have to tank it. So much of playing Hyperion is just tanking hits and waiting and tanking hits and waiting, and it just gives the opponent so much time to keep up the pressure on you and leave you on the back foot, and gives you no opportunity to take the game back from them. To help put this in perspective, let's take a look at CASSIE. CASSIE is a great example to use. When I made my first set of videos, I thought the worst character in the game was arguably either CASSIE or Princess Tiffany, hard to say between the two of them. In fact, when I made that video, I actually recognized that Hyperion was bad, but I don't think I truly understood how bad he was yet. I thought he was third worst in the game to those two. But what I've come to realize is that both of these characters are characters that, yes, are weak, but they have skill expression. If you are good at the characters, you can make them do better than they should do. Now don't get me wrong, that doesn't mean these characters are secretly good and you just need to get really good at them. Someone who gives an average performance on Rainbow will probably do stronger than someone who gives an amazing performance on CASSIE. The risk-reward here isn't really a good trade-off, but at the end of the day, if you do want to give yourself a challenge and you don't mind the handicap, you can still be a really strong character playing CASSIE. You just have to play it really, really well. Now, I have a lot more experience on CASSIE over Princess Tiffany since I don't really like playing Princess Tiffany, so I'm going to use CASSIE as my example, though they're both kind of similar in playstyle. CASSIE at first seems like she might have a lot of the same issues as Hyperion, and in some ways she kind of does. CASSIE also has literally no defensive tools. In fact, she doesn't even have Hyperion's barrier. If an attack comes her way, she has no way to deal with it, and this is part of the reason why her fight against Hyperion is so tough. Because all three of Hyperion's major combos, which deal anywhere to a quarter to a third of your health bar if you just try to block them with your usual shield, no blessings or super shield, all three of them to CASSIE are completely unblockable without the super shield. There isn't a single tool at her disposal that isn't curse-based that allows her to survive these attacks. And as a result, CASSIE is forced to rush down the enemy Hyperion. The problem being, well, you know, that's kind of how you get baited into getting destroyed by Perilous Portal. So you have to cleverly construct your combos to not only be a fair trade if you do get hit with a Perilous Portal with whatever Hyperion's sending at you, but on top of that, you have to make sure that whatever you're sending is the kind of thing that's more easy to block in reverse than it is when being sent at Hyperion in the correct direction. In other words, CASSIE certainly has very many weaknesses. She can get stuck in a loop of having to hide and shield a whole lot because she has so few defensive capabilities. Although she does have mana generation, she has quite possibly the worst mana generation in the game, as the extended version of this blessing, which halves the cost of 3 runes rather than 1, is much worse than the usual version, which only halves the cost of 1 rune, but for a much cheaper cost and a much easier to draw rune. But at the end of the day, the reason why CASSIE works and Hyperion doesn't is because having any mana generation at all means that when played well, CASSIE can keep up the aggro. The way that CASSIE beats Hyperion is you do a basic, not greedy combo where you try and hit him with a curse that will disable him or shrink his runes. And the millisecond you have finished that combo, you start a new one, and a new one, and a new one, and a new one. And you just throw curse after curse after curse after curse after curse at Hyperion's face. And sure, he's going to super shield some of them, but he can't super shield all of them. And once you start landing 1 curse, 2 curse, suddenly you've got momentum. Suddenly you've got a few seconds of Hyperion not being able to cast anything at you, so you can get some time to get your super shield back and press your advantage and send more combos his way. Not to mention, if Hyperion does reverse your own combos onto you, and you have multiple combos stacked all coming your way, you can use your own speed boost blessing to speed your own runes into your shield while super shielding to super shield multiple curse combos at once and destroy the entirety of your own set of runes. Yes, CASSIE is underwhelming. Yes, CASSIE is ludicrously difficult to play for not much more reward than you would get playing a much easier character. But at the end of the day, CASSIE is a functional character. She has a mana generation tool and she has a combo tool. She can spam curse combos, she can keep up the aggro, and while she doesn't have any tools to defend herself if the enemy hits her with overwhelming damage, if she's able to get the advantage early on and hit them with curses in the first place to completely negate the enemy's attacks, then she won't even need to worry about blocking. And so a hyper-aggressive playstyle with Cassie actually does help compensate for her worst weaknesses. Meanwhile, what does Hyperion have? He's slow, he doesn't even defend well against anything except red runes. When it comes to curses, he's terrible. He hits hard, but good luck actually hitting anyone. And when I say he hits hard, I say that, he kinda does, but honestly, Strat hits harder with his speed combos. Honestly, the Jin hits harder with his big red runes. Hell, even Caleb probably hits harder than Hyperion. You're just choosing to play a character that is slow, can't defend himself, and has no combat mechanics. And the worst part is, were you hoping that maybe he would get a different boss fight? Because, you know, story mode never lets you fight yourself. It didn't for the teachers. In fact, it even made up stories for the teachers for why they're fighting the students. It even made up lore to explain what's going on. I am not kidding you, man. The amount of disappointment I felt, I can't put it into words. When I reached the final boss with Hyperion, and it's just a fucking Hyperion recolor, and the story does not even acknowledge that Hyperion is fighting Hyperion. Hyperion just goes on as if it's business as usual, no comment to make about the fact he's fighting a clone of himself. Christ, man. I hate to say it, man, I really do. This is why I was kind of hesitant to make this third video. I don't like how negative this is, but it's just so true. This last stretch of the game feels like it was made in a week, max. Between ludicrously and boringly underpowered runes in custom runes, to ludicrously overpowered to the point of trivializing the whole game mode, challenges which literally require randomness and AI manipulation to be beaten, and this absolute train wreck of a final character, it really is a shame that every single part of this game up to this point was so great. But these last little bits of content towards the end are just such massive disappointments. Well, at the very least, I can finally fulfill my childhood dream and achieve 100% in Doodle Hex. Only 2 more challenges to go. How bad could it be? You see, I've completed every single challenge in the game except 1. Well, 2, because the final challenge for Lapang is locked behind me completing this challenge. But I just can't beat this one for the life of me. And the weird thing too is, I swear I have beaten it. I don't know. I swear I keep killing the enemy just before the time runs out. And I swear the timer still says I have a few seconds left, but it keeps saying you lose after I seemingly kill them? But that can't be right. I just must be running out of time, right? I sat here and did this challenge. And by the way, this challenge isn't particularly easy. Like, it's not the hardest one, but it's one of the harder ones. I sat here and did this challenge over and over and over, thinking that I was the crazy one. Until eventually I got a run so perfect that I beat this challenge with like a good 6 or so seconds to spare. And I saw "you lose" pop up when I killed the enemy. Are you ready for the funny part? I was not crazy at all. This challenge is physically impossible. For whatever backwards ass reason, this challenge, and this challenge alone, is the only point in the game where, despite the object of the challenge literally being to kill the enemy in the time limit, and you cannot win unless you do that, killing the enemy causes you to instantly lose. I wish I was joking. Do you know what the best part even is? After hours of scouring the internet for any way to get around this, or at least just get a bit of a sanity check on what the hell was happening in front of me, I managed to find a GameShark code that would allow me to beat any fight I wanted at the press of a button. And even the GameShark code didn't work, because the way it won the duel was by instantly killing your opponent. And killing your opponent makes you lose the challenge, even though that's also the win condition of the challenge. So you know what that means? That means it's time to cheat, baby. I am so glad we have access to this debug menu, man. This is the developer debug menu, and using this we can activate debug mode. Once we activate debug mode, we can just press a button and win any challenge or duel we want at the press of the button. And unlike the Game Shark code, it doesn't seem to kill the opponent to win the duel, it seems to actually send a message to the game to just tell us you win, even if the opponent is still alive. Meaning that we actually can beat this challenge without triggering the you lose message. Only if we literally fucking hack the game to get access to the dev menu and turn on debug mode. Wow. So yeah, this challenge was actually just physically impossible. And no, I don't have a single ounce in shame in using the debug menu to cheat this challenge. I beat every single other challenge in the entire game fair and square, and I beat this one fair and square. It just says you lose when you beat it. I literally saw that I beat it. I even triple checked by deciding to do again another one run where I slow down time to do it literally perfectly so that I didn't have to do everything super fast. And yeah, I do it literally perfectly. I killed them with literally like 15 seconds on the clock to spare, and what do you know? It looks like I still didn't win. So that's confirmation that I've literally beaten this challenge legit like 6 times over at this point and was just losing my mind thinking that I was doing something wrong. So as far as I'm concerned, fuck you, I'm just skipping it using the debug menu. At the very least, the very last challenge on the list was not that difficult. I just had to beat this impossible challenge to unlock it. And so once I beat that, I managed to do it legit on like my second try. Meaning I have now officially 100%ed Doodle Hex. Man, does that feel, well, kinda good. I don't know. It's nice seeing this little sparkle animation on every single character on the list, but this is also a little bit empty, isn't it? Man, it really sucks to think that's it. You know, I've done everything. It's all gone. This is the point where the tragedy of Doodle Hex really sets in. It all really just comes crashing down on me. Just imagine how great this would feel if this was an online multiplayer game that you could play on your phone. You know, with a proper finger touchscreen rather than having to use a stylus on a DS. Just imagine how smooth that would play. And just think about the fact that, well, I mean, quite literally, for the most part, there is no competitive sort of high-skill game that exists that is best played on a phone. Doodle Hex might be the first game in existence that has enormous potential to be competitively engaging and yet is best played on a phone. And yet it came out just a little bit too early. Imagine we live in the dimension where this game comes out in the early or the mid 2010s on the App Store. Imagine we live in the world where this game gets online multiplayer, a ranked leaderboard, balance patches for characters, an online community built around the game. And just imagine how much that would have filled up all this emptiness. Instead, it is quite a somber feeling you're left with when the game's finally done with. I mean, I'm sad that I had to be so miserable for the ending of this game, that I had to have so many negative things to say, but like, I had to say it. I mean, I still love this game, and I almost feel guilty that I had to say so many bad things about it here, but I've gotta be honest with you, the last stretch of this game just really feels poorly made. I don't hold it against the developers. I can only assume they were very much rushing these last few features in the game, and I guess I get that. But seeing how obviously rushed these last little bits of the game is when the rest of it is so polished and amazing, it really just saddens me, because it just makes me think what could have been. If this went somewhere, if this became a franchise, if Doodle Hex experienced all the success it frankly deserved to. It fills me with so much sadness to see what happened to this game that, well, I want to fix it. So I'm not going to get into this at the end of this video. It's too much to get into. But I'm going to throw it out there. I can't promise anything. But aside from Null and Void, one of my biggest ambitions, one of my biggest dream games I want to make before I die, a big mark I want to leave on the world, is I want to make that game. I know it couldn't literally be Doodle Hex most likely, but something like it. The working title I have right now is Ediction. And because I frankly love this super unique style of gameplay, I've already, just for the fun and the love of it, even though I'm not sure if it's ever going to pan out, come up with so many ideas for different character designs and runes for my own version of a game like this. Ideas for different mechanics so that it will be similar but not the same as Doodle Hex. And I've even made a few themes for the different characters in the game, similarly to how every single character in Doodle Hex had their own theme. In fact, although I haven't tended to use them quite as much in my videos as the Null and Void music, you might have heard some of these already. With that said, that's a dream for another time. If you guys would like to hear about my ideas for this sort of theoretical, spiritual successor, I would love to ramble about them, so let me know if that's the kind of thing you think you'd be interested in. But for now, I think it's time to lay an old friend to rest. I can only complete the whole story with every single character so many times. I can only practice beating Hyperion with CASSIE over and over so many times. And I don't know if I ever want to endure having to complete every challenge in the game again. So maybe it's about time I finally laid this game to rest. Well, I don't know. Maybe one last playthrough, for old time's sake.